Good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to the launch of our series of dialogues on short-lived climate pollutants as we head into the World Environment Day. My name is Prachi Seth, and I lead the AVPN Climate Action Platform, and I will be your MC for this session. As many of you know, the short-lived climate pollutants are powerful climate forces that remain in the atmosphere for a much shorter period of time than carbon dioxide, yet their potential to warm the atmosphere can be many times greater. In fact, these superpollutants are responsible for up to 45% of global warming. So tackling fast and ambitious actions to reduce these superpollutants will be vital to keep the temperatures from rising beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius. The AVPN Climate Action Platform recognizes the need and the potential to focus on this topic more specifically from an Asian market perspective and explore the role of private sector, businesses, profit entities, think tanks, and investors who can be instrumental in raising awareness and substantially reducing the short-lived climate pollutants in Asia. On this note, I would like to introduce our highly esteemed panel of speakers. Ada Lam, she's the Deputy Executive Director, BRACE. Catherine Ross, she's the Associate at WRI's Climate Program. Dan Chun, Managing Director and Founder, Cycle Management. Xiao Zhang, she works with the Climate Change and Business Sustainability Unit at the Society of Entrepreneurs and Ecology. And lastly, our moderator, Meg R.G. Ryu, Head of International and Country Context Climate Works. Megan, over to you.
Thanks so much, Prachi. And a good evening and a very warm welcome to each and every one of you tonight. So as Prachi's outlined, the focus of today's discussion is on how to deliver lasting change through short-lived climate pollutant solutions. And of course, short-lived climate pollutants, or SLCPs, are like the supervillains of climate change. They're a group of greenhouse gas emissions such as black carbon or soot, methane, tropospheric ozone, and hydrofluorocarbons that remain in the atmosphere for a much shorter time than carbon dioxide, which is a really good thing, but can cause significantly more warming of our atmosphere, which is a really bad thing. And scientists estimate that these superpollutants, as Prachi said, are responsible for about 45% of climate change. And, you know, I've worked in climate change mitigation for over a decade, and I only learnt that statistic today. So they get a lot less attention than our favourite climate bad guy, carbon dioxide, and we even talk about them in terms of carbon dioxide equivalent. Yet they're often also dangerous air pollutants. They have negative impacts on human health, on agricultural productivity, and also on the health of our natural ecosystems. And given that we have less than a decade to peak global emissions, then rapidly reduce them in order to stabilise global warming to acceptable levels, tackling superpollutants is a matter of utmost urgency. And this is particularly true across Asia, where short-lived climate pollutants are growing from sources such as methane from rice paddies and livestock farming, black carbon from forest fires and manufacturing, and HFCs from refrigeration and air conditioning. And so while the region is experiencing strong economic growth and affluence, this growth can only be sustained if Asia embraces sustainable and low-carbon development, particularly given the region's high exposure and vulnerability to the worsening impacts of climate change. And because superpollutants also play a negative role in human health and agricultural productivity, which of course are linked to economic productivity, tackling SLCPs clearly should be getting more focus in our efforts to achieve sustainable and climate-compatible growth. And so to succeed, businesses, policymakers, philanthropists, investors all have a role to play in mobilising innovative solutions to solve this issue. So let's dive into our discussion tonight with our fantastic panel of experts, and we're going to cover the opportunities and challenges in reducing SLCPs and what more we can all do in our work and in our partnerships towards this goal. So I'd like to bring our first panellist into the discussion tonight, Katie Ross. Hi, Katie.
Good evening.
Hi. can you help me to further set the scene by elaborating on the role that mitigating SLCPs plays in achieving our climate and development goals?
Sure, Meg. Thanks so much. And thank you very much for the kind invitation to participate today. It's really a great pleasure to be advancing this discussion with you all. I think I'm going to start by really underscoring some of the points that Meg and Prachi have made. This is a basket of gases that really has been overlooked historically. I mean, it's quite staggering that it is responsible for about half of the global warming we've experienced to date, when so much attention is focused on carbon dioxide. And this basket of gases called short-lived climate pollutants, or SLCPs, is actually relevant to all sectors of the economy. It's relevant to how we produce energy. It's relevant to how we grow food. It's emitted when we drive our vehicles, and it's related to how we cool ourselves. So when we're talking about SLCPs, we're really talking about a livelihood and development agenda. And SLCPs do have this really powerful impact on the climate system, as Meg outlined there, and Prachi as well. They've got these real heat trapping abilities. So when you emit one molecule of these gases, for example, methane, you actually have a warming potential of 86 times more than that of carbon dioxide over a 20-year period. So that's quite staggering. And what happens is because they're fairly short-lived, and they have this heat trapping potential, when you emit them into the atmosphere, you actually get an immediate temperature relationship. So when you emit something like a long-lived gas like CO2, that actually takes a much longer time to see in terms of the global temperature profile. But SLCPs, you do get this immediate temperature increase. And when we're talking about climate change and the role and the risks of overshooting these critical tipping point thresholds like 1.5, really emphasizes the need for fast mitigation, particularly when limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. I think in the Asian context in particular, I think it's really worth underscoring the development benefits as well that come across along with SLCP mitigation. These are local benefits that can accrue both from a human health side, a food production side, and an economic side. The statistics in Asia are quite staggering, with less than 8% of the population having access to clean air. Black carbon is a part of PM 2.5 and really impacting air quality in the Asian region. 4 billion people in Asia have experienced air that's less than the WHO guidelines. So that's really significant. And then from a food security perspective, as Meg mentioned, Asia is a huge rice producer. Rice is both a contributor to the problem as well as impacted by the problem. So rice emits a lot of methane when it's being produced. But the methane in turn produces ozone, which in turn retards the rice growth. And they've done some studies in Vietnam where about 50 kilograms of rice can be lost per hectare as a result of these ground level ozone and methane emissions. So it's pretty significant. And when you're looking at 60% of the world's population being undernourished in Asia, this food security challenge really needs to be addressed as well. And then, of course, in Asia, some of the world's largest emitters of SLCPs are located here. We've got China, India, Indonesia, really significant emitters of greenhouse gases and short-lived climate pollutants as well. So when emissions are mitigated in these regions, there's also significant global temperature benefits and reduction in these dangerous climate impacts too.
Really fantastic overview. Thanks so much, Katie. And can you just touch on, given this is clearly so important for Asia as a region, why is it not a higher priority? Why are we not hearing more about this?
Their strange name means that you don't hear enough about it. This weird collection of gases, why are they brought together like this? And they cut across all sectors of the economy. So I think what's interesting is when you actually address this at a sectoral level rather than at a gas level. So when you're talking about food production, You want them to be talking about it in terms of improving the efficiency of food, improving the livelihoods of farmers. And when you're doing activities like that, you're actually getting this SLCP benefit. Same is true in oil and gas production. When you're improving leak detection, repairs, etc., you actually are doing cost savings for companies, but then again, you're getting this methane benefit as well. When you're cleaning up the transport system, when you're moving things to electrification, you are reducing these particulate emissions. And when you're reducing agricultural burning, which is a big deal in the Asian context, that's going to be generally good for farmers as well. And you get these black carbon benefits too. So I think it's just coming at it from a sectoral development perspective when you're getting at the SLCPs rather than tackling the SLCPs head on as the entry point to the conversation.
Thanks so much, Katie. Really, really fantastic insights. So I'm going to bring our second panelist, Ada Lamb, in now. Hi, Ada.
Hi.
So Brace has been significantly contributing to the conversation around the importance of SLCPs. So why is it that Brace decided to focus on this issue as part of its climate change mitigation efforts?
I think I can really echo the very salient points that both you and Katie made. Our decision to strategically focus on these, I'm going to call them super pollutants, as a nonprofit is really guided by the science and also a measure of pragmatism. We can all be in agreement that the aggressive reduction of these gases within this decade will be completely essential to reaching our climate goals due to their outsized warming effect. And acting now can have a very immediate climate impact. If I can borrow from an analogy that our principal likes to make, we as humanity are on all this boat together, right? And we're about to fall off the precipice, which is climate change. But we still need to paddle as hard as we possibly can and pull every single lever at our disposal to keep ourselves from falling off this cliff. Mitigating short-lived climate pollutant emissions is one of those essential components that can keep us going in the near term. We really believe that addressing these gases can give us a fighting chance towards the transition towards a more climate-friendly system. So our focus as an NGO and as a funder is very much informed by this ethos as well as the scientific consensus.
Oh, thanks. Oh, I love that language about giving us a fighting chance. And so, Ada, what would you say to other philanthropists about what role they should play and how they should think about this issue?
Mm-hmm. It's multifaceted. Our organization has been working to protect natural ecosystems and address both the climate and extinction crises for decades now. But as a nonprofit supported by a single family office, we're also more nimble and able to pivot. And when we heard the scientific consensus, we made the decision to divert the funding towards short-lived climate pollutant mitigation for the reasons I mentioned above. And as an organization that is funded by a single family office, we were met with less friction in that pivot. We also saw an opportunity in terms of addressing the emissions coming from Asia and to maximize our climate impact through our philanthropic capital. I think concurrently, this is what Katie spoke about as well, climate impact can very much be intersectional. So for example, with the climate smart agricultural initiatives that we fund, while the main mission is to reduce super pollutant emissions, such as methane, nitrous oxide, black carbon, the programs also deliver broader social and economic impacts as well. So Katie spoke about how we can improve agricultural yields by using more climate-friendly agricultural practices. This in turn has an impact on livelihood and can address poverty issues. We can also reduce the human health costs that these emissions have, such as reducing haze and black carbon. So for other philanthropists who may be addressing other SDGs, I would say, since the climate crisis is so deeply intertwined with environmental and social problems in the contemporary context, they can also review their initiatives and see how and where they intersect with climate justice. I think addressing short-lived climate pollutants has an additionality that can certainly be built into other programs very organically.
Thanks so much, Ada, and for really bringing to life that connection between climate and development. You know, it is kind of the holy grail, I think, and it's really, I think, positive and encouraging to see how closely these, you know, addressing the issue of super pollutants is in also delivering development outcomes. So thanks for bringing that to life. I'd like to invite Shuo Zhang to join us now.
Okay, thank you, Meg.
How are you?
How are you today? Thank you. So, sorry.
Sorry, start? Yeah, I was just going to say that you work on the front line with NGOs to address environmental pollution problems in China. So really important work. And I'm just interested to hear from you how much attention are public and private entities in China giving to SLCPs?
That's a very interesting problem because based on my opinion and my point of view, that SE is a grant making foundation, and we mainly supported those grassroots in environmental protection area, especially in pollution prevention and control area. But their main target is to stop and reduce the emission from the industrial area. That is, we are working on how to build the mechanism to restrain their behavior. That is to encourage their the environmental friendly behavior and to punish those who are challenging the rules. So based on our past job, they're mainly focused on those pollutants which are characteristic pollutants like NOx and SOx. So the NGOs would work based on the Chinese regularity to monitor those pollutants and discharged from the enterprises. That is their handle, and that is how they did work. They would monitor and report and to implement the policies, and also to promote the enterprises to a more environmental friendly way. But as referred to SLCPs, to be honest, from the NGO point of view, very little was done on the very specific pollutants, because first, it's not dominant on the standards, and second, for example, as the black carbon, black carbon is kind of not produced by the industry, but by the industry. It's more like produced by the burning of the scattered coal and the straw. So as referred to the scattered coal, the Chinese government has done a lot, such as they will promote the urban area, the rural area, to use maybe gas and electricity to get heat and power instead of the scattered power and instead of the scattered coal. And in this area, the NGOs could mainly just monitor and to see if this area is still using the scattered coal, and at this level they will maybe report to the government and to see, okay, they're still using the scattered coal, but I don't think you have done enough to shift them from the scattered coal to the cleaner energy, because there's no gas here and there's no electricity power here. So maybe it's better for the government to change their ways of using the scattered coal, such as maybe using a smarter oven or using something else to watch the coal before using it. That is maybe through the advocacy policy, the NGO could do something, but very little, as referred to the SLCPs. I think under the atmosphere of the climate change, maybe we are also trying to adjust our strategy on climate change from the past pollution control perspective to how to promote the climate change. So I think maybe in the next stage, we would take this SLCPs and also the CO2 into consideration and to see how the NGOs could do on that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Joel. That's really, really interesting and important work that you're doing. And I'm sure there's a lot that we can all learn today from the work that you're doing in supporting the front line, in bringing greater accountability and transparency to environmental pollution. I'm going to bring our final panelist in today, Dan Choon. Hi, Dan, how are you?
Hello, fine, thank you very much.
So Dan, as a visionary technology enthusiast, and by the way, I want that on my business card, that is just fantastic, and a venture capitalist, why should the private sector focus on addressing super pollutants?
Yeah, thank you very much. I didn't know that I have that on my business card. I think it was on my LinkedIn. You picked that. You found that I should take that off. It's not conservative enough for the industry I'm in. Yeah, yeah, but you're right. So yeah, as one of the 3 general partners of Cycle, a venture capital fund investing in this theme, our focus has been around emission reduction through energy-related investments and super pollutants and technologies reducing super pollutants already make up half of our portfolio currently. And so I'm going to speak a little bit about how we execute that strategy, and maybe it can be beneficial to some of the philanthropists and other investors out there. I think I want to reframe it a little bit because for me, when I looked at this at the very beginning, it felt that this is really a low-hanging fruit of having a huge impact in a very foreseeable time. If we think about super pollutants, the good thing about this is it's 100% man-made. I mean, the stupid thing about it is it's 100% man-made. The good thing about it, it's very concentrated in few industries where we omit some of these super pollutants, not all of them. And the fellow panelists have explained the fractured nature of black carbon, of all these things we have to do for methane. With Cycle, we've focused on the more technical ones, especially in the energy grid and renewable energy and in cooling. So when we look at HFCs, which are emitted due to the growing amount of cooling devices out there, especially in Asia, the temperatures are rising. We have to cool more. We emit more HFCs. We have to cool more. It's a vicious cycle. We can break through that vicious cycle since there are already deployable technologies that have been researched since the 60s or even earlier. They work. They have been proven. They have been rolled out in certain industries already in Germany, for example. And what we are focusing on is bringing these to the growth markets in Asia. And the interesting thing there is just the scope of these very niche technologies and the scope and the impact they can have. What we learned now, very, very interesting figure that Katie referenced that told us about half of the greenhouse gas pollution is actually due to these super pollutants. Another figure that's often referred to is that they make up 1.2 degrees of warming potential until 2050. It's significant, and we cannot ignore them. But the good thing is we don't have to. It's actually something that's already readily deployable, the technology that omits these emissions. So we've been focusing on 2 areas, especially SF6 free gas insulated switchgear. I won't bore you with too much technology, but I think it's highly relevant how potent this greenhouse gas is. We learned earlier that methane is responsible for, has an impact of 86 times the warming potential of CO2. Sulfur hexafluoride, which is an insulation gas, 100% man-made, has an impact potential of 23,500 times that of CO2. So it's much bigger, the impact. Just to give you a figure that explains the scope, the SF6 emissions are equivalent to 100 million cars. So if we solve that problem, in one instant, we solve a 100 million car emission problem. So it's worth our while. And the interesting thing is that it's growing heavily because of the electrification of the grids in Southeast Asia, in China and India. And that has to happen because of phasing out fossil fuels. So it's all connected. These things are ready to be deployed. And it's a quick win. I think what I would like as a core message to get across is that there are solutions that are omitting these emissions in switchgear, for example. We invested in a company that does not emit. It has 0 SF6 inside. It's actually cheaper than the existing solution. So there's no excuse not to deploy it. And companies are starting to deploy this very fast. The same is true for water-based cooling, omitting HFCs. It's actually cheaper in the operation costs, and also it's getting down while it's scaling up. It's getting down in the price of installing it. So it's a very interesting market. It's representing the SF6 market is around 28 billion. The cooling market is even larger. So for financial gain, it's interesting. For quick impact, significant impact, it's highly interesting as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Dan. And you know, I just always love these stories where you learn that a solution is actually better for business than business as usual. I always love hearing about those sorts of things. So we're now going to move on to the next part of the session today, where we're going to have a more open discussion amongst our panelists. So we've got a sense now of the diverse breadth of expertise that they bring. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to ask a question, invite one of the panelists to answer, but other panelists are more than welcome to jump in as well if there's something that you would like to contribute. So we've touched quite a bit on the role of super pollutants in achieving sustainable development and the importance of it for our climate targets as well, for addressing climate change. But I'm actually really interested to unpack this a little bit further and really get a sense of how important it is for achieving the 1.5 degrees temperature goal of the Paris Agreement. So Katie, I'm hoping that you've got some more specific answers in relation to that for me.
Sure. Fortunately, I do. There have been a lot of scientific assessments that have been done that have looked at the impact on temperature when you're looking at mitigating CO2 alone and also mitigating CO2 plus the short-lived climate pollutants. And the story is pretty staggering. So if you reduce short-lived climate pollutants, we can mitigate 0.6 degrees Celsius by 2050. And this by 2050 is really important because a lot of the scientific models run through 2100. So the Paris Agreement goals of limiting warming to 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius, that's for the end of the century. And whenever you look at these temperature profile curves that the world is going to experience, there's this peak initially before temperature comes down toward the end of the century. And this peak is really important because this is where you have these risks of overshoot and tipping points, and you're setting off irreversible climate processes that will be very difficult to come back from. So when you are able to mitigate this 0.6 degrees of Celsius of warming, really in the front end, kind of lowering that peak, but also lowering the whole curve, that's really, really important. And I mean, the science is clear. We cannot actually meet the Paris Agreement goals without ambitious action to address SLCPs.
Oh, it's so interesting. Yeah, I'm surprised it doesn't get more attention. Why doesn't it get more attention? Ada, do you have some thoughts on why this topic does not get as much attention as carbon emissions from fossil fuels, for example?
I do. I think short-lived climate pollutants. Let's say it's a mouthful, right? I think actually these baskets of gases need a rebranding as a whole. In terms of the general public, I think they are not aware at all in terms of the multiplier warming effect that they have. So there is a knowledge and education gap, which in turn acts as a barrier towards further funding for solutions and actions to address super pollutant mitigations. On a international treaty level, I think some of them are excluded from NDCs. I think Dan was speaking about SF6 earlier, and maybe in some of his work, he can expand on how, because they are part of the electoral grid greenification, they have been excluded from that conversation as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Ada. If I may chip in, it's really interesting because, of course, there's a good reason that this has been structured this way. And the reason is that from the shift away from coal, gas, and fossil fuel-based energy towards renewable energy needs another structure of the energy grid. And there's also a good reason why the switchgear market, which is responsible for over 85% of SF6 emissions, is growing heavily. It's growing because for two reasons. One, the grid is being extended. Electrification all over Asia is being financed by large institutions and countries. The Asian Development Bank has a huge program to bring up also low voltage grids to medium voltage grids, which are more energy efficient. So there's an inherent logic there, but as a side effect, the market of SF6 or switchgear, which is 85% of the global emissions, come from these switchgear systems, the security switches of the grid. This is growing by over 50% over the next 5 years. So it's a heavily growing market that is in need of solutions. And thankfully, so we invested in a startup from Germany that has deployed in Germany, now Canada, going to the Asian markets as well with our support. So they are readily available. And also now we see that the big manufacturers are also changing and switching to SF6 free switchgear now. So there's a tipping point that has been reached. That's true for SF6. It's about to be accelerated for HFCs as well. So we see that regulation is under discussion. And to come back to your original question, why was it hesitant? Why was it excluded? As Ada said, basically, there was a lot of pushback by the industry, and well, this is a public forum. I won't go into details, but I mean, it's well known that this industry has some intricacies when it comes to protecting its own interests, and there have been huge cases in Europe for that to break that down. It seems that finally it's moving, and the industry is changing, also because of these kind of technologies being deployed by startups has an impact on the larger players and the larger manufacturers now.
Fantastic. Really good to hear that there's a bit of momentum in the energy sector, given how critical it is to solving so many other aspects of the climate problem. And so I'm just interested now to unpack. So we've got a bit of momentum happening in the energy sector, not enough yet. I get that. A bit of momentum around HFCs, HFCs. But there's obviously still a lot of untapped potential in relation to sort of addressing this issue. So I'm just wondered whether the panel has some thoughts on what should we be focusing on next? Where's the sort of big untapped opportunity? And Shuo, do you have some ideas on this?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Megan. I saw problems in the QA. It's a very, very good problem as referred to how to put the coalition together. So from the NGO, from the NGO point of view or from the foundation point of view, it's very hard for the NGOs to work on SLCPs. A very specific reason would be it is very hard to monitor those pollutants, such as the black carbon. It's yes, because based on our past experience, there's no such a good technology for us to monitor how much the pollutant is discharged into the air. It's very, very hot. So based on this particular issue, I think how to bring them together on this is first to raise their awareness. And at present, if we see the ability of the whole industry, if the whole NGO philanthropy industry, I don't think they have enough knowledge or awareness of SLCP at first. And second is how to, bring all the stakeholders together to the same issue as how to reduce the SLCPs. Maybe a start point would be through the campaign out through some advocates, maybe some policy advocates based on specific area or specific industries, those who would produce the SLCPs. And as referred to how to bring them together, and I know the most ideal way is to get a win-win is to get a win-win result, but it's very, very hard because the reality is usually the compromise of the every aspect. So I think maybe a start point or maybe a sensible way is to first to empower the whole industry to raise their awareness about what is the SLCPs and how it works and what is the impact of the SLCPs. And second is to raise the awareness of the whole industries as well as the policymakers. Ask them to pay attention to this particular pollutant. And third, after the specific strategies or the specific policies, I think the NGOs could maybe find their positions to monitor those policy implementing and to promote some more smart policies and to maybe promote or to empower the industry to to reduce their emissions of the SLCPs.
Thanks so much. And sorry, someone was going to jump in, I think. No? Okay. Ada, I thought I might bring you in on this because I would love to hear a little bit more about the opportunities and how they can be captured in, sort of from land-based emissions. So given how much, agricultural production is growing in the region and seems to be so closely linked to methane emissions, what more could be done there? Where are we seeing that things are working?
As a whole, I think our panel has identified a manifold of opportunities for funders to address super pollutant mitigation within the Asian context. At Brace, we are currently funding agricultural solutions that firstly already exist, and also funding organizations that can facilitate the behavioral change with farmers that needs to occur. I think this is, maybe I could best illustrate with an example. So we are currently funding a 3-year nationwide climate smart rice initiative in Vietnam. The nation is currently the 4th largest producer of rice in the world. However, the conventional rice cultivation techniques that are used result in a vast amount of methane, as we've spoke about previously, but also nitrous oxide from overuse of chemical fertilizers, as well as black carbon from crop residue burning on rice paddies. To give a sense of scale of the impact, rice cultivation by some research has been shown to account for 1/3 of the nation's total emissions, so huge. And as Katie spoke about in her introduction, a lot of the methane comes from the flooding of rice paddies, which produces the ideal environment for microbes to feed on decomposing organic matter and emit methane. So within this country context, the programs that we fund provide training for farmers, and we hope that this will cascade across the nation to smallholder farmers across North, Central, and South Vietnam to use and adopt climate-friendly rice cultivation methods. The methods that these organizations promote not only address the super pollutants that we spoke about, but they also come without yield sacrifice and actually result in reduced input costs for the farmers. This leaves more of the household money for livelihood issues. And some studies have actually shown that farm incomes can double when they use these climate-friendly rice cultivation techniques. All the while, super pollutant emissions are dropping and the soil is also sequestering carbon. So I think this is a really good example of the intersectionality that I spoke about previously, and the how we can bring development into the conversation, as you spoke about, Megan, as well. And then one final thing that I would like to bring is we also quite uniquely, I think, embed behavioral sciences within our programs. So we bring in behavioral scientists and experts to consult on our grantees programs, and they help to ensure that this behavioral change within the smallholder farmers is long-term and will benefit both the people and the planet. So as Dan has said, I think there are many opportunities for quick wins to reduce emissions now without much sacrifice to the people who are using these new techniques.
Thanks so much. Yeah, so interesting, such an interesting discussion. So, you know, we've touched a little bit on some of the barriers. You know, they seem to be, what I've heard so far is that sometimes they can be hard to monitor. Sometimes there's a lack of awareness. But, you know, is there more to the picture than this, given that it sort of seems like, you know, there's all of these positive outcomes that we can get from addressing SLCPs, increased productivities or yields, you know, cost savings for businesses. You know, what's preventing this from happening at a greater scale? So, Katie, do you have some thoughts on that?
Sure, I can take a stab and would love the other panelists to come in with their perspectives as well. I think, you know, the finance piece is really crucial to this whole thing. And while these projects generally make economic sense, they do sometimes require high upfront costs. So those need to be bridged from public and private finance. So that's one consideration. And, you know, in some cases, there are some perverse incentives to not take action. So there are some, you know, Ada referenced this work in Vietnam's agriculture sector, looking at the methane issues in rice production. And the trick here is to limit the amount of water coming into the rice fields and let the rice fields air out a little bit more. It's called intermittent wetting and drying. And when farmers have subsidized water, and this has been their practice historically, there really isn't much incentive for them to change their practices, even though more yields could be created. So I think there are some kind of perverse incentives that need to be addressed. I think one interesting topic that's coming up more is around carbon pricing and also the social cost of methane. So when you begin to price in these near-term climate impacts as well as the development impacts, and you put a price on these emissions, I think that could be a way for effectively driving policy. And, you know, the international community is really stepping up its efforts to address SLCPs. There is a global coalition that works solely to address short-lived climate pollutants. That's called the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. That's a group of 70 state partners, got 60 NGOs, got a lot of IGOs, development banks. And this was formed in 2012. It's got about an $80 million trust fund to deploy work to increase action on SLCPs. I mean, that's at the political level. So getting leaders and ministers to actually start talking about this issue a lot more, start putting targets in their nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. That's really important. And then also kind of unlocking these barriers and scaling up some of these pilot projects that are shown to be incredibly successful, but need a lot more push behind them. And I think one final point I'll just make now on the finance piece is that countries are actually increasingly addressing short-lived climate pollutants through their economic recovery plans in response to the pandemic. And, you know, you're not going to see a plan that says our economic recovery is about short-lived climate pollutants, but you will see plans that say we're going to be supporting our farmers to develop better farming practices. We're going to create jobs where there are orphan gas wells. We're going to ask people to go and clean those up and address the methane issue. And I mean, particularly relevant in China, China and Korea, for example, their plans do include a lot of electrification for their vehicles. So you're cleaning up the black carbon issue as well. So I just wanted to mention that there is some increasing traction, and you have to just look a little bit deeper, sometimes at the sectoral level, and not always see the SLCPs explicitly mentioned.
I think that's really promising to hear that there's actually more happening than meets the eye. And so we started to touch on some solutions here, which I think is really exciting. This is always the bit I love. We've talked about regulation. We've talked about finance, the need for finance, carbon pricing. I think that's really exciting given the global warming potential of short-lived climate pollutants. Katie's talked to us a little bit about the Climate Action Platform, which is a fantastic, forum for progressing some of these issues. And I'm just interested to hear from others on the panel. Is there anything that we're missing from that fantastic list of things that we can do?
Maybe you can chip in. And there was also a question from Robert Lang regarding what countries and what kind of incentives are there. Tax incentives and policies, which Katie is much more competent to answer all of these. But what we see from the venture investment and technology side is that Europe is beginning to phase out some of these and to start or prepare regulation for HFCs. Europe has the plan to reduce at the moment 99% HFC cooling-based solutions down to 21% and help alternative coolants to gain 79% of market share. And what we see is that in the international regulation, Asia is around 10 years behind that regulation at the moment, but the discussion is accelerating. Now, why I'm mentioning this is the catalytic change that we as both venture and philanthropy investors, what we can do is, and we can see it in some of the investments we've done, once there are a couple of technologies out there, the regulators also change their position, because what they don't want to do, obviously, is destroy the economic workings of these countries. But if there are technologies that can be adopted by also the major players, and if technology is also shared in kind of an IP transfer, which we are arguing for to deploy faster, then things can happen quite fast and regulation follows. So sometimes the regulation is first, sometimes the technologies are first. We argue that bringing the right technologies into the markets can accelerate things, and we can see it now from some of our investments where we are working together with large multinationals. They're making this. They're helping us on the sidelines to influence or to make people aware of that the technology exists, readily exists. So that's very interesting. And one thing I forgot earlier to mention, because we talk about HFCs, for example, or short-lived climate pollutants, and the other panelists made a good job in explaining how that's interconnected with other emissions. Especially Katie mentioned that earlier, for HFCs, for the cooling, and you probably all sit in air-conditioned rooms at the moment. The interesting thing is that cooling is also responsible for 17% of the energy consumption. And this is growing. And the amount of cooling that is being installed is also growing globally. So that's really, if we can reduce and make them more efficient, which new solutions do, then we're solving a core problem as well.
Thanks so much, Dan. And on the mention of audience questions, we do have quite a few which have come through, so fantastic to see how engaged our audience is tonight. So I might actually throw back to Katie on Dan's prompt with a question around examples of governments that are taking up opportunities on the ground with companies and industries around SLP mitigation. So can you provide some examples of governments that are doing this through policy or tax incentives?
Sure. I guess I'll speak at the policy and the target setting level here, if that's okay. And I mean, the national climate commitments that countries say under the Paris Agreement are their foundational climate policy statements. So a lot of our work in recent years have been centered around raising government attention to focus on SLCPs and subsequently incorporate short-lived climate pollutant commitments in the next round of NDCs, which have been submitted last year and continue to be submitted this year. In the Asian context, SLCPs are typically not well addressed in countries' national climate plans under the Paris Agreement. And I wouldn't say that's exclusive to the Asian region, that's actually across the board. There are actually quite limited details on policies and actions that most countries are going to take to address short-lived climate pollutants. In Asia in particular, China's target for reducing emissions is limited to CO2 only. So they've got this non-CO2 piece as well, which is currently excluded from the climate plan. If you are to actually quantify what that looks like in real terms, that would be the size of the 5th largest country emissions in the world. So that's how much of the emissions are actually excluded from China's target. That's not to say China's not taking action, and Shuo can talk to this a lot better than I. But just to give you a flavor, that piece is not included. Similar in India as well, they also have a CO2 only target. So really kind of bolstering this international momentum, getting philanthropies engaged around the importance of addressing SLCPs, the development benefits that come along with action. I think we really are seeing that as a means to spur greater action. And some countries like Vietnam, for example, have actually specifically enhanced their climate plan to include SLCP reductions in agriculture. So there is some movement that's already underway, and we will continue to track that and try and spur some more action.
Thanks so much, Katie. And just on talking about China, there's a question here for sure. So when you create a coalition to work on issues such as SLCP reduction measures, how important is it to harmonise the various interests and agendas of different actors, and how hard is it to achieve that?
Okay, thank you, Megan. It's a very interesting problem. Is that I think it is suitable for every industry and every particular kind of pollutant, because yes, it's a very good problem is how to bring all the stakeholders together and how to harmonize them. And of course, the ideal situation would be to get a win-win solution or to get a win-win result. But the reality is very, very tricky. So it's always the result of the compromise of every participant. So usually in China, the situation would be the policy goes first. The government goes first and the pressure goes first. After the pressure, and yes, I will recall maybe Katie for a little bit. And at this moment, we are all waiting for the Chinese government for the strategy to get the car for the coal neutral to fulfill the target of 2060. And also we are looking forward for their industrial solutions and their province solutions. I think they would mainly focused on the CO2, but as referred to SLCPs, we will see. And let's go back to the problem. Usually the policy goes first, and then the policy that the policymakers will call the head of every industry to go first. Yes, because they are head of each industry, like maybe in the power system or whatever. So they would do first, and as an example, they will show how the industry how you could do and what we were doing. And after that, after the whole industry is working and the policy is implementing, the NGOs could review the problems and they could to do some adjustments and to do some smart things, adjusting or maybe to do some. To fix some mistake of the policies, and also to make sure that every policy, including the punishment and the encouragement, is implemented, and that is how the mechanism works in China, including the stakeholders such as the government and the enterprises as well as the NGOs. But as referred to SLCPs, the major production of SLCPs is not, some of them is not the industrial, it's maybe the farmer. So as referred to the farmers, from the Chinese strategy, we could see that farming is not at the very important position at this period. I think it's based on the restraints of our technology. it's a reality. So we have to see that. So I think maybe the next in the coming 5 years, the importance of the focus would be still on the reduction of the carbon of the CO2 as well as the pollutant that is important. So maybe a trigger for the SLCPs is based on the reduction of the pollutant emission.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much. And we have time for, I think, one more question. So I might throw this one to Ada. So even if the private sector is interested in investing in SLCPs, in reducing SLCPs, how important is public awareness and cooperation from governments to achieve success?
I think when we are identifying potential grantees, we do also look at the macro context, and also we look for funders who are able to grantees who are able to enact and turn government policy into a reality. So from the agricultural context in Vietnam that Katie spoke about, Vietnam as a nation actually has goals to transform the whole nation's rice cultivation into climate-friendly techniques. So having this piece of policy and the top-down mandate is incredibly helpful for our the organizations that we fund, because this policy is supporting the work that they do, the grassroots level work that they do every single day. We, through this interplay between both policy and our funders' actual work, we are able to cascade our impact and ensure that there are more long-lasting changes. So I think it's incredibly important to find that interplay between policy and actual work that is being done on the ground.
Thanks so much, Ada. Mm-hmm. All right, we are almost out of time, but I would just like to wrap up by inviting each of our panelists to share one call to action with our audience for today. So Dan, I might invite you first.
Call to actions. So the shift towards more sustainability, both in all kind of emission reduction programs, it has to be hardware related, because things like this, we see a lot of the venture investors are too late in the food chain or invest in platforms and so forth. I think one ask from me is, there are difficult and technical problems, but we have to address them, because without them, all the rest doesn't follow. So that's, if we want to be catalytic, we have to change these systems that are causing the emissions, and the core ones are in the energy field. Of course, there are low-hanging fruits. There are smart ways, like Ada described. But yes, I think about hardware too, please.
Fantastic. The techno enthusiast suggests we focus on technology. The right answer. All right. Shaw, would you like to share with the audience your takeaway or call to action for them for today?
Okay, so a very interesting. Thank you, Megan, and thank you, everyone. And as I got this topic, this is this is the first time that I get in touch with the SLCPs. You know, if from the SC Foundation, from the foundation's point of view, it's a very new topic, and it's a very interesting topic. I think we would bear this in mind, and to give us some guide, to give us some guidelines, adjust our strategy in grant making in the following period. Thank you.
Katie, what's your call to action for the audience?
I think it's about context matters, and what we're learning through our work is that the entry point in which you start this conversation on short-lived climate pollutants really matters. So for some country contexts, you can come in at it from a climate perspective, and that's fine and that resonates. But for a lot of regions, particularly in the developing world, these conversations need to be started from a development frame. So how can actions to address short-lived climate pollutants improve the lives and livelihoods of our citizens? So I think keeping that front of mind when we begin this work and continue this work is pretty important.
Thanks so much, Katie. And Ada?
I think I really follow on from what Katie said. For funders who aren't looking at short-lived climate pollutants at this moment, look for intersectionality. Climate impacts are interrelated with every core issue, from biodiversity to gender, to poverty alleviation, to health, and more. So look for those points of intersection and see how we can deploy more capital as we need immediate and increasing action towards addressing these baskets of gases. And thank you, Megan, for being an incredible moderator today.
Thanks, Ada. And yeah, a huge thanks to our panel tonight. What a fantastic and interesting discussion. And thanks to our audience for your interest, your attention throughout, and your excellent questions. And of course, a huge thanks to AVPN for bringing us all together again for yet another fantastic conversation and opportunity to learn from each other. So good night and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Panelists, for this very informative session. I have shared a link on the chat box, so do please take out some time to fill the form so that we can engage with you for our future sessions as well. I will keep in touch for those of you who have registered for this session so that we can invite you for the follow-up roundtables as well. Thank you, and you all have a very, very good evening. I'd like to especially thank Brace for their continued support and for bringing in this very vital topic to our AVPN audience. Have a very good evening.